Okay. All right. So, so the case kind of talked about, just as an overview, Thomas Green, and he was the newly, I guess, hired marketing manager. That was his title. Um, he was promoted pretty rapidly, but then he's being harshly criticized by his boss, which is the Frank Davis guy. It appears like um, they just kind of disagree on different work styles, and their marketing projections are different. Um, and then Green kind of uses the term creative accounting in terms of how he decides his figures. Um, and then it sounds like there's this silent conflict that's developing, and yeah, that's about it. So it sounds like from the case that we wrote, we were supposed to pick a different side, and as like a third party advisor to determine what we thought should be done. Um, so, what did you guys see as some of the key issues in the case?
So I chose to advise Green.
Available in quarters.
Sorry, guys, the speaker's going off again. But yeah, I decided to advise Thomas Green, and some of the issues that I was able to recognize, is one is that his boss had that same exact role as before his boss was promoted, so that could complicate the situation by him kind of micromanaging Thomas. There's that dynamic. And then, I also, just like what you said, it seems like they had different strategies of how they go about doing their jobs. And, as much as I'd love to blame Frank, it did seem like Thomas was kind of closed-minded from a lot of the feedback he was getting from his boss too. So I didn't think this was a one-sided problem.
Grass Valley Medic 92 and service local, station 92.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote kind of from the perspective of McDonald, kind of. Just that, like, I mean, she saw potential in Thomas, and so she promoted him and wanted to give him a chance, and she also gave him the advice of hey, please seek out some of the management here and like learn from their experience. And I don't think he's really doing that. Like he has like a vision of what he wants to do, but yeah, it's kind of like what you're saying, like he's not really taking any of the feedback that he's receiving. I feel like regardless of Frank's motivations or motives, because I feel like Frank is asking some like reasonable things, even if they might feel micromanagey. Like if Frank had some trust in his judgment, then he probably would lay off a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of felt like it was like they kind of both had valid reasons to complain, I guess, about the situation. But I think at the end of the day, it was more about ineffective communication. Like, I mean, for instance, like Frank Davis, like you say, he had good points, and as the supervisor, it's not unreasonable for him to have expectations. I mean, he is the boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
But excuse me. But I think, I mean, like it kind of said, it says he was just kind of harsh, really, in his approach to determine that. Like, yeah, I mean, like my initial thoughts were like when they had like their little meetings and that he brought him in and they kind of discussed things. It was like, it sounded like the meeting was more to like criticize him and just bring him in and tell him like, hey, I don't really like you. And so I don't know how effective that really felt, I guess, on Thomas's end, being, the employee. Yeah.
How do you think he should have done it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's good to like establish your expectations, especially if you are the boss. Um, but maybe like, I mean, again, we don't know the tone. I guess we're reading it, but I mean, I guess from the words we're reading, the tone seems kind of harsh.
Mhm.
And but maybe like getting more of like a communication factor going, like having a discussion, like okay, like what should we do? Like, it sounds like you have your good ideas here, and this is what I expect. Like, how do we meet halfway? Um, yeah, because I mean, it sounds like Thomas does have like good ideas. Like he has ways that he does things, but he does need to be reasonable and be willing to change his strategies. Like he doesn't use maps or diagrams or anything, which
Or any data to back up his claims.
yeah, he just starts spewing. So I'm like, dude, you gotta like provide some evidence here.
Right.
But I don't know. What else did you guys think?
I
Yeah.
think, I mean, just kind of go back to like your breakdown in communication. I think Frank was trying to, like say, hey, this is, I mean, he didn't give a lot of positive reinforcement, but like, I think instead of maybe kind of, throwing the hammer down at that like 1 month meeting, he could have had some more like informal conversations between, like in between that time that he met, so that they could just touch base, and be like, hey, yeah, I don't know. Because it sounds like Frank is like, sends him an email, hey, I need this information. And then like every time he didn't get it, it was like one more tally against him just
Yeah,
through an email, But I'm sure if he had like a face-to-face conversation with him, just like stop by his office, hey, I'm still kind of waiting for that. I bet he would have like jumped on it. I don't know. But just maybe more like informal, more frequent kind of um gatherings, like, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I agree. Yeah. Did you were you gonna say something, Brandon?
Oh yeah, I was just going to comment kind of on the same thing, from Frank's perspective, when he has those meetings with Thomas, he could try to take that counseling approach where he kind of is like, okay, well, these are the expectations. This is where I'm not seeing those expectations being met. And then instead of just trying to tell him what to do, try to take that approach of what can you do, or what kind of plan do you think you can do to try to meet those expectations. And then from there, have that approach of what can Thomas bring to the table? What's his ideas to meet those expectations? So I think there's room for Frank to be a better counselor, but I also think Thomas is being a bit closed-minded in all of this as well.
Yeah, definitely. So it says, if you were Shannon McDonald, would you have hired Thomas Green? So kind of interesting question. I mean,
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, it talks about how there was a lot of other people with more experience, and Frank had his own list, and so I'm not sure if she consulted him at all or if she just kind of went for it.
yeah,
That's hard to say.
Yeah, I can say it's a tough call. I think, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's okay that she kind of took a chance on him. If anything, it probably taught her, hey, this is why we, hire people with more managerial experience, or this is why we go through that track that it kind of laid out. I mean, if anything, it was a lesson learned.
Yeah, I think it's always tough to hire someone, and she knew there was going to be some kickback from it. She knew that it was going to be, a tough sell. And so, that going into it, maybe you got to consider some other people.
yeah, it sounded like, I mean, she kind of even notified him almost in a way like, oh, you're going to get some flack for this, and you should be aware of that. And and like, oh, I'm taking a chance on you, and I mean, that's not to say I think she was bad hiring him. I mean, it sounds like she saw something of good potential, especially for someone that's has such um, a difference in age from typical candidates for that position. But and maybe it would be more interesting to know the people that he was up against. Really, I mean, we don't know that. Um,
One thing that I think was interesting is that like she kind of she explained to him like that she is taking a chance on him, and she kind of gave him some guidance and stuff, but I don't feel like she was very invested in his success. I mean, she just was like, here's this and this, and then kind of completely checked out.
right.
So I think she could have done more to just kind of set him up for success. But again, I don't know. It kind of comes down to, well, Frank's his manager. So I don't know.
Right. Just kind of like pass the ball off to him.
Yeah.
Oh, take care of it. I don't know. How would we describe Frank Davis? Like, what does he value? What are some of his end goals that he's shooting for here?
It said he's worked at the company for 17 years. And I can't remember. Did it say he also had the same job? He had done the job before?
I believe so.
One that Thomas was in. So, I mean, he's got valuable experience. He has these projections, knowing what we know about that time period, that economic time period, we know that it wasn't that great. So maybe his projections were a little bit too optimistic, but how's he supposed to know that? So I don't know. I don't think he should be so easily dismissed by Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some little tweaks here and there that he could have done to better coach Thomas, but I didn't see any huge red flags.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, if he clearly had the position before, I'm sure he has some sort of handle. And then again, assuming he did get promoted from that position, even must be doing something right.
Yeah, and I think kind of like what I was saying before, like regardless of his biases or prejudices, because he didn't get to hire who he wanted to hire, I would hope that after being at a company for 17 years and that you're mature enough to be like, all right, well, this is who I've got, so let's just try to work with it. But that isn't always the case with your boss. But yeah. I mean, I think he tried to work with him.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, so Thomas Green now. What are some of the things he values and the end goals that he is after?
Well, he seems to be really ambitious, right? I mean, he definitely put himself in a position to try to get these promotions. He's definitely got his own style of how to do things, and I think Kendra, you kind of nailed it when you said that he didn't really seek anyone's help for this new position, not just his boss, but there's other people in the department that's at his level, and didn't talk about anything about him reaching out to them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think he's trying to do the same thing that he did before. Like he's trying to make a big splash and get noticed quickly. But like I think he kind of needs to slow down a little bit, because he achieved his goal. Like he wanted a corporate position, but he's not doing what's asked of him, and he's not like meeting their expectations. And that's because he's like, oh, I've got to do something to blow him out of the water, but it's reflecting poorly on him.
Yeah, it kind of seems like maybe there's this this difference in what he kind of expects out of his previous position and what his position is now. Mm-hmm. I think maybe he's assuming that his same tactics are going to always work, but it sounds like I mean, it sounds like he's over the region now, is what it says. And I would imagine there's going to be some differences in his approach if he wants to be just as effective.
You would hope.
And it seems like he's got the skills, right? It talks about how he was a really good salesman. He's really good with talking with clients. You know, what he was lacking was just getting research, getting all the facts that he needed to kind of back up the skills that he does have. And so one thing that I really liked about the article we read is how, you know, let's see what it says. It said in the, you know, building effective one-on-one work relationships, it said few people systematically think through and write down a detailed action plan on how to build their relationships with their bosses or, you know, key peers. And it seems like he's got the talent to do that. He can, if he really kind of focused on how he could improve his relationship with his boss, that he could come up with a pretty good plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he just kind of lacks maybe a little humility in the process, and just kind of understanding that, hey, you know, be the student at this point and learn from someone that's gone before you. How are you? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just was agreeing with you.
Okay. How do we, and this is something we talked about in our case study, I think, but it says, how do the actions of Thomas Green differ from the expectations of Frank Davis?
Well, he's not doing anything that he's asked.
Yeah.
Like Frank's expectations are to update him on his whereabouts and respond to his emails with the information that he needs and like things like that.
Right.
And you know, like to not talk bad about him to his coworkers. And but yeah, there's no response from Thomas. Like he's not listening.
Right. I mean, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it seems like, you know, like we talked about, Frank Davis has his expectations, and as much as Thomas might have different ideas, I mean, the things that he's clearly said he has an issue with, he hasn't shown any sign of changing them or even making an effort to change them, which is probably a big red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it asks, who is mostly at fault for the state of the current situation? I think that was kind of interesting question. My personal opinion, I think, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say who's mostly at fault. I mean, I'd like to say that Thomas is, because, you know, his superior is still a superior, but I definitely think they're both at fault here.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like you said before, it's just been a breakdown in communication, and, you know, it takes two people to do that. So, like, yeah. I mean, even though, like, kind of like what I was saying, like, even though Frank is saying, this is what I want you to do, I don't know. I mean, maybe Frank needs to change his work style a little bit just to see if he can get better results. But, you know, he's also pretty
Headstrong.
Immovable, yeah. So they're pretty equally at fault.
Yeah, I feel similar, and if I had to choose someone, I'm leaning a little bit more towards Thomas.
Yeah, again, I totally agree. I think he kind of needs to take the initiative as the underdog in the situation and just, you know, do his time, and maybe he'll get the opportunity to take the lead.
I mean, like that was one thing that I said, like in my write up, was like, if he would just put kind of his ideas on hold for a little bit and start responding to Frank and prove to him, you know, hey, I'm a hard worker, I can take direction. You know, this is my past work history, you know, supposedly he makes it through this year. Then, like, after he's kind of proven himself a little bit, then he'll be like, hey, here's some of my ideas. Can we talk about them? And then I think Frank would be more open to having that conversation.
Right. It sounds like there's just a lack of the mutual respect that's necessary.
Yeah.
And each have the respect for each other, then they're never really going to trust each other, which again, sounding like this relationship and what it should be in order to work effectively, you're going to have a decently appropriate relationship.
Yeah.
What do we think? What kind of action do you think we would take if we were Thomas?
I think for my write-up, a lot of things that we already talked about, but I definitely think he needs to have a more humble approach.
Mm-hmm.
His priority should be to write up a development plan to improve that relationship with his boss. And I actually talked about the things that Kendra just mentioned. Like if he just kind of buckles down for him, does what his boss wants him to do, he can build that trust, and then he can start integrating his ideas. It was almost word for word what I talked about too. And just trying to build that trust with his boss, that should be like his priority right now. Then I also mentioned other things like reach out to other coworkers and get some feedback from them. And then at the very end, just like he's got to stop that negative talk to other coworkers.
Yeah.
That totally destroys the trust and is not going to help.
Yeah. I think it's ridiculous that he's almost bragging about how he's avoiding his boss. Like, that's so silly.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think he takes a little bit of pride in having a different opinion, I think. And sometimes you just need to lay your guard down and say, hey, well, he knows what he's talking about too. And yeah. How do power and office politics come into play?
As annoying as they are things that are in the office, like
Yeah.
it just happens. And so you have to kind of learn how to play the game, that just makes it sound kind of like manipulative, but I just mean it in the sense that you have to be able to communicate, and you have to do, like learn to do what's asked of you, and kind of like you're saying, Brandon, like be humble and I guess be a little bit flexible. You just can't be so stubborn, because then you can't get anything done. It's just like what we're learning in the 7 Habits book, like you can't be independent or depend. Well, yeah, that too. You need to be able to be interdependent, so that you can accomplish your work.
And I think just going along with that, when you talk about the politics, you're kind of talking about, human behavior and to change those attributes, just like the book that we're reading, it takes time. And so I agree. You don't want to go in there and just try to change everything, because they're going to get a lot of kickback. You kind of have to, just like what you're saying, you got to kind of play the game a little bit. You kind of have to take it easy and realize that change takes time.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of recall a couple of years ago, I worked at this firm back home, and it was interesting because that's something we talked about a lot. I remember, like, within my first week, something the partner said was just like, we have to kind of play some politics in the office, and we've got to play the game, the same thing we're talking about. And initially I thought that was kind of ridiculous, but I mean, the more I worked there and saw the culture that was evident, and you saw kind of the necessity to just, there's that power struggle sometimes between a client versus, the professional who, in their mind understands what this person should do. But I mean, again, right, who's to say who's right, who's wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, I think it again comes down to that importance of communicating effectively. And I would imagine this is probably the thing gets talked about in most professional workplace environments is how to communicate more effectively, and because it's just so challenging.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. see what are each of their conflict styles. So I guess comparing Thomas to Frank.
I think Frank is good in the sense that, well, I mean, he's not perfect, but he told Thomas like what it was that he wanted him to work on. Thomas just seemed to kind of avoid it and kind of mock him a little bit. So his conflict style's not that great.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like that Frank takes more of that, takes a little bit more of the aggressive side in, like what, in determining like the issues at hand and then just stating them very clearly. But I don't know, it sounds like Thomas chooses to avoid it a little more and then just ignore the situation altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like he just kind of was getting through the meetings, like, yeah, and then later didn't really do anything about it.
Yeah. Let's see, we already talked about that. How can he salvage the situation?
He meaning Thomas?
Yeah, I guess it's insinuating Thomas.
Yeah, I think. Mhm.
Just do what he's being asked to do.
Yeah, that's just
Yeah, Thomas could, I think right away, Thomas could just do what his boss asked him to do, just right away start, just meeting those expectations. I think that's step one.
yeah, and even looking at that, there was that email at the back, the correspondence, and it looks like the last thing that he emailed to McDonald was kind of, I mean, it was like that last straw email, but even at the end, he was just like, if you can't do these things, then I recommend like finding someone who can, right? And so I don't know, it sounds like there's still a glimmer of hope in the man's mind that Thomas can just cooperate with his expectations for the position and they can move on. I'd imagine that that's possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Talked about that. Sorry, I'm just going through the sheet real fast. Okay, so I guess we're supposed to talk about gospel connections now. Yeah.
Well, I just think of like the commandments or things that the church asks us, or like church leaders ask us to do. So it's like just do them.
Yeah.
So that's so easy,
Yeah, I mean, I think of a lot of like, respecting your leaders and, like we all have bishops or stake presidents, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we always agree with their personalities all the time. And, we're all different, but at the end of the day, right, our leaders are people that we respect because of whatever counsel they give us. And I think that can be applied just the same in an office environment and the hierarchy of power and organization.
it's true. Like I think specifically within callings, people are placed in leadership positions that you will not always agree with, and you're given a task to accomplish, and you've got to figure out how to work with those people and get your task completed. And yeah, you can definitely have like a clash of personalities, but still be able to fulfill your calling.
Yeah, I agree. You may not like the person, or you may not respect them, but you can respect the position that they hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm supposed to share the conclusion of the rest of the story. Here. So it says, after McDonald's February 5th, 2008 email, Green took the offensive against his boss. He crafted a series of memorandums, emails, reports, and projections that exposed inaccuracies and creative forecasting. This data enabled Green to build some alliances with other marketing personnel. He used the data to ultimately side with him. On April 4th, it was announced that Frank Davis was being moved laterally to an undefined special project. However, Green's tactics were seen as overly brutal by many in the company, and although he won the battle against his boss, his career was irreparably harmed. There we go. McDonald's distanced herself from him. That's sad. By July of 2008, Green announced he was resigning from his position to pursue full-time studies for an MBA. And there you have it.
Interesting. So it was like, even though he was determined to prove that he was right, it did not help him.
No, it didn't. It kind of gave people a bad taste in their mouth for him.
Yeah.
Mm. And that goes along too with, when he was kind of talking bad about his boss to his other employees. I think we talk about how when you do that in the workplace, that person's going to be like, I wonder if, if he's talking bad about this person, is he going to do that with me?
Yeah. Yeah, people are going to think twice before they say things to you,
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. She distanced herself too. She lost respect for him.
Well, I think, yeah. And one thing that I thought during like my write-up was that her reputation was kind of on the line because she's the one that took the chance on him. And so
Right.
if he didn't work out, then it was also a reflection on her and her judgment. So I could see why she distanced herself.
Yeah, I could too. I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting too that he went to study for an MBA. It's just kind of interesting that he was really invested into this career for a while and really changed his path there.
Was it Frank that went to go, or?
It was actually Green.
Oh.
Yeah, so I guess Frank, what they did is they moved him, they said laterally, so I guess they're assuming he's not losing any sort of like authority.
Yeah, so it wasn't a promotion, they just moved him.
Right. And it says he was to an undefined special project.
That sounds like so bad, like, hey, we're gonna put you in this closet and just do a menial task.
Right. Just because, Green, so to speak, won. And but
so he really did kind of a lot of damage.
yeah, he did. He kind of just took that like it kind of said, it said Green took the offensive side, like he like rebutted back at him, it kind of turned into this like ensuing battle between the two rather than just like kind of like we talked about for this past few minutes, just taking the humble road and like cooperating with each other. And so yeah, that didn't turn out great for either of them, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it says, to finish it, we can only speculate what would have occurred if Green had tried to help Davis work out the discrepancies and problems with forecasts. Perhaps both would have succeeded. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
But that kind of wraps up our questions. Any other comments we want to make?
I don't think so.
No, this is pretty good.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Life lessons, right? So, well, that's about it. So, thanks for participating and all your thoughts.
All right. I will be sure to send the link out next week.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, I'll see you guys.
Yep, see you.